Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston, Solutions Review is proud to showcase NextThink and the Solution Spotlight, a unique online event for industry professionals.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solution Spotlight featuring NextThink, and focused on how to scale your end-user computing team with continuous orchestration and automation. In the modern workplace, there is an onslaught of never-ending and increasingly complex IT problems. Overworked EUC teams must do more with less. While automated remediations can solve simple issues, they fall short of larger, more complex IT challenges, which are now the norm. As a result of the limitations of automation, EUC teams face thousands of decisions, unending menial tasks, and non-stop recurring IT issues that hinder them from working on larger initiatives and strategic projects. So today, we will shine our spotlight on NextThink and see how they can take real-time AI-powered data combined with a low-code orchestration engine to optimize complex workflows, monitor progress, handle exceptions, and ensure all tasks are completed in the right sequence with the right dependencies. And joining us to walk you through the NextThink solution is Catherine Dahl, Senior Product Marketing Manager, and Luis Dunn, Solution Consultant. Catherine, Luis, thanks for being with us.
Excited to be here, Doug.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is one of the topics that we've had a lot of interest in, and we've had a lot of conversations about. Catherine, I know you and I have had a chance to speak in the past on a spotlight event, but before we get going, Luis, why don't you just share a little bit more about your role there at NextThink?
Yeah, so I'm a solutions consultant, so I work with a lot of prospects and customers to help them understand how NextThink will be able to help them in terms of solving their technical challenges, and then also how that translates into the business outcomes that we're looking to solve as well.
Yeah, great. And I know we're gonna bring you in for a demo in a bit. Catherine, I'm gonna hand it over to you, but before I do that, I'm gonna set everybody's expectations that we're gonna give Catherine and Luis an opportunity to kind of go through the presentation and a demo and really give you a good deep dive into the NextThink solution today. If you have any questions or you have anything that you'd like to know more about, by all means, submit those. We'll take them here. I'll gather them all together and we'll have an opportunity to go through them at the end of the presentation. So for now, Catherine, I'm gonna hand it over to you. I know you're the product guru. So I'm going to let you give a bit of an overview here, and I'll catch up with you guys on at the end of the presentation.
Sean.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. And it's always nice to be welcome back a second time. That means I must not have messed up too bad on the last one. So I appreciate being here today and having the opportunity to speak with your audience. For today, as Doug mentioned, the goal of NextThink is really to deliver zero-touch IT. We know that this is the future. And when I say zero-touch IT, I mean no waiting on employees to submit a ticket, no waiting on service desk agents to reach out, and no waiting for a resolution. And we at NextThink, we know that NextThink Flow will help teams to continuously deliver end-to-end automation that bridges the gap between monitoring and management with powerful orchestration engine and workflows. So as we think about this vision, there's still a lot today that stands in the way of us being able to deliver zero-touch IT. According to the State of the DEX Industry Report from September 2023, so just a few months ago, we know that 43% of EUC teams' time is spent on fixing problems related to device health, just device health. And as a result, teams do not have enough time to work on strategic, proactive work. In fact, 25% of engineering time is spent trying to understand and triage incidents. And that's likely why 96% of individual contributors spend most of their time resolving low-level issues, but say what they really want to do is innovate. So nearly 100% of people that are individually contributing want to innovate, but they can't because they're stuck dealing with these recurring issues. And we know that most of our customers have implemented task automations like device restart, clearing disk space, and remediating disk encryption. And that helps to reduce time spent, but certainly they are still experiencing that 43% of their time putting devices back into their desired state. So those task automations are not enough. We see so many EUC teams still spending time on device health because it's not possible to eliminate all of the issues that come with device health today. So certainly we can solve some of the issues with simple scripts like remote actions, but for complex use cases like SCCM client health, OneDrive compliance, Outlook plugins, you and your teams really need the intelligence on top of automation, and you need to be able to orchestrate it all together. So as we think about that, we really want to focus on those complex issues like SCCM client health. So as we look at all the steps on the screen here that go into maintaining client health for SCCM, we know that these are incredibly manual. When it comes to a task automation, we know that you need to manually run that remote action, check to see if it worked, the status, and then depending on the outcome, perform another action and repeat that over and over and over again. Now, we know it is possible to string these steps together and add complex workflows into the scripts to take the right action, depending on different conditions, but it's still very complex and it usually requires that senior expertise. And we know that's not always available, especially with the hiring difficulties we're seeing today. And even if you do have those experts, we know that they still face limitations. So as we think about task automation and how it's not keeping up, we want to focus next in this demo by Luis on how NextThink Flow leverages remediation scripts for SCCM in the right order, at the right time, to ensure the right level of compliance. So for now, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Luis, where he can show us a demo of that SCCM and NextThink Flow.
Thanks, Catherine. So I thought I'd start with highlighting our NextThink library. This is an awesome repository that has a ton of content from our platform, including the flow that I'm going to show you here in a moment. So I can go into my library that's directly in the platform. I can click into the library pack we have for SCCM client continuity, and I'd be off to the races because I have access to remote actions and also the flow itself. So I'll be jumping into this particular flow here. And before I jump into the visual designer here in the middle of the screen, I wanted to kind of call out the thinklets and the flow control here on the right-hand side. So today, your team is mostly dependent on some sort of command line expert that has experience writing PowerShell scripts that is going to include this type of logic on the right-hand side. You're going to have to connect the dots into other systems, which means integration, expertise. You're going to have to build logic in that PowerShell script to do everything you need to do. So that's going to be all the conditions and the what if this happens or if that happens, what else do we do, right? And all of a sudden that PowerShell task becomes very complicated and it becomes hundreds, if not thousands of lines of code. And that becomes a difficult task to maintain over time. So with this visual editor and low code approach, you can kind of go from a posture of complex scripts to more of breaking these PowerShell scripts into very straightforward, specific to one single task, then leveraging this visual editor to build out the workflow step by step. So these thinklets are your way to connect into the other parts of NextThink. So for example, being able to use our remote actions and our campaigns and how you interact with your employees, as well as integrating with third-party systems, which I'll touch on here in a few moments. The flow control is being able to be dynamic with your remote actions so that you can build out conditions, right? So as we get into the SCCM flow here, you may think, okay, are we just some sort of agent restoration solution? Absolutely not. So the idea here is, while we see SCCM, this could be another type of tier 1 application or service that your employees need to be productive. And the other thought here is we want to give you a self-healing approach, right? Your users aren't going to be calling in telling you, hey, I have a problem with my SCCM or my security agent. They're not going to know that there's a problem there. What they're going to call you for is, hey, my computer or my apps, they're running really slow. I'm seeing crashes, I'm seeing freezes. What's going on? And by that time, your support teams are really kind of behind the 8 ball. They're going through a number of kind of manual type of troubleshooting steps to figure out what's going on. So the advantage of Flow is that we can be running behind the scenes in a self-healing fashion. So when we see an issue, not necessarily when the user sees it or experiences it, we can immediately and automatically act in this self-healing fashion. So this is going to lead to decreased employee downtime, and ultimately what we want is improved employee experience. So let me walk you through the process here. So we have an initial remote action at the top, and this is going to be to go get the status of the application or their agent or whatever you're looking to self-heal and ensure you have that kind of desired state that Catherine mentioned. In this example, our SCCM status. So we'll run that automation on the device, and then we're going to go and kind of run the conditions, right? So is the SCCM agent installed? True. If it's not, then we'll go ahead and say it's false. In that example, you can see visually, right? You have this yes or no gate, which aligns to the values that we're configuring here. So the other part of this that I really like is while I certainly appreciate command line interface, it can be hard to kind of visualize what is happening unless you speak in that type of language, right? And in this format, it's very easy to see what is happening, right? You have this visual representation or this living documentation of each flow that you develop over time, right? So if the SCCM agent is installed, we want to also make sure that the other components are working the way they should be, right? Because we need SCCM to be working so that we can one, see the device, two, be able to deploy applications, and also be able to deploy security patches, right? So these are all things that you'll be doing later, but you need SCCM to be running, right? Or your just general workstation agent. So we'll check, is WMI running? If it's stopped, then let's go through a number of steps to repair WMI, right? So that's going to call out another rote action, another automation to go through its series of checks automatically, right? Again, this is all taken care of automatically behind the scenes. This isn't me going in and doing all the manual step-by-step troubleshooting that you're doing today, maybe. And then we'll go and check and repair WMI. If the next step, if WMI is fixed, then we'll go ahead and validate that SMS is running. And if it is running, then you can see kind of the fork in the road. We'll go ahead and end the flow. And we've gotten the SCCM agent back in a good working state. We can say that, okay, we're good to go on this particular device. But maybe there's another group of devices that there's a problem and we just can't get the SMS agent running. So we'll go through a repair and a restore here to kick off the next steps. And it's going to go through its process to wait a few minutes for those types of tasks to complete. And then after those things are automatically done, let's go get the status one more time and make sure that we're in a good place. Again, if we are, we'll end the flow. If we're not and we're running into problems, maybe we do a whole uninstall and we're going to go through kind of a clean attempt to reinstall the client, right? So it's going to go through all these steps one more time, again, automatically, right, behind the scenes. And it's going to keep going. So you can see how this really starts to build out. But what I want to get to is the idea of flow is we're going to be running behind the scenes and taking care of your reoccurring types of incidents, right? And that's going to kind of create ticket avoidance for you guys in a good way. So Catherine had mentioned kind of that firefighting, or like how I refer to the whack-a-mole of incidents, right? Instead of that approach, let's give you more time to be working on the strategic initiatives, right? And to that point, when we do run into an issue where we can't automatically fix an incident, like in this example, what we'll do is we'll open up, in this case, we'll integrate with ServiceNow to open up an incident, right? So for this particular complicated issue, let's go ahead and assign it to the right team with the right information. And again, before the user has to engage with IT, right? So now we can get this on the right team for the level 2 or level 3 team to get this device back in a good working state.
Thank you, Luis. That example perfectly highlights how Flow delivers continuous orchestration from diagnosis to remediation with that full intelligence built in end to end. As you're kind of scrolling there from all the way through the entire workflow, it reminded me of some of our customers who have thousands of lines of PowerShell code, up to 1,500 lines, just to get a workflow like this running. And this really shows the power of a workflow and that drag and drop editor and how it really only stops when the job is done. For example, with this SCCM client health workflow, we know that based on our calculations for an organization with 100,000 devices, anyone using task automations today, so those remote actions, if they use this workflow instead, they would save an average of 5,624 hours annually just from moving from the remote actions to this workflow. Now, if they don't have any automation set up today, which we know many of you don't, that would be a savings of 11,248 hours annually just from this one workflow alone. So as we know, this workflow, as you made evident in your demo, Luis, it would clearly help reduce the time spent on device health and help to really chip away at that stat we saw earlier, the 43% of time being spent on device health. So that was a fantastic demonstration. And as I mentioned, that line of 1,500 lines of code, we certainly know that scripts are powerful, but they take time to write, review, sign, and edit. And you really have a limited number of staff that has the expertise required to create it. I know certainly Luis could create it, absolutely, but that's not something I'd be able to do, even though Doug, and I did appreciate this, referred to me as a product guru. I'll take that title, but I certainly can't write PowerShell code. So we know that expertise required for PowerShell code can be a significant blocker. We have one customer who is responsible for blocking 30 to 50 code signings a week because he just doesn't have enough bandwidth to be able to review and sign them all. And we know that Flow is able to eliminate that with its drag and drop visual designer. So I know we touched on the workflows there in that first demo, Luis, but in this next demo, would you be able to show us how easy it is for anyone to create a workflow just from scratch? That would be great to see.
Certainly. So let's go through a use case where something that, again, that's kind of hard for your users to know about, right? So when is your battery going to go sideways or south, right? In other words, when do we need to replace your batteries? And these are the types of decisions that are challenging to make. You don't necessarily have the visibility, the data. And these can be costly over time, right? If you start to just purchase batteries when you might not need to purchase them, right? So let's go through a flow here and build it from scratch. So we talked about our thinklets earlier. So I'm going to you'll see me kind of drag and drop this remote action. I'll go ahead and give it a name. We'll call it get battery status. And then what we'll do is go ahead and map to the remote action to get the battery status. Again, this is a remote action available from our NextThink library. I'm going to stick with Fahrenheit, you can see the other outputs, or in other words, the other data points that we're getting from this remote action. What we're going to look for is the battery health, right? So I'm going to hit done, and then we're going to build out our conditions. So again, in PowerShell, I'm having to write all this logic to get the battery status, to start to put in all those if-else types of conditions. You can see I'm not doing that. I'm just literally almost configuring thinklets or typing in descriptions, really, right? So we'll call this battery replacement. Put a question mark there. We'll hit add condition, and we'll go ahead and put yes for this particular gate or the fork in the road. And then I'm just going to kind of go through some mapping exercises. So we're going to map to that remote action. I mentioned the battery health is the metric we're looking for. And I'm just going to do something easy, right? So less than, and we're going to put a custom value here. So we're just going to say something straightforward and easy. less than 50%, we want to go kick off a flow to replace the battery. And if it's above 50%, we'll go ahead and say no need to replace the battery, right? In your environment, you could go a step further, and maybe there's a threshold that you configure that makes more sense for you guys. Maybe there's a third bucket, and that third bucket is just kind of a bucket of devices that you want to be aware of that are coming soon in terms of needing a battery replacement. So a number of ways that you could go about this, right? This is just to give you an idea how you could, right? So I'm going to finish out this particular condition, and we'll call this 50, right? So in this case, yes, the device does need a battery because we're below 50% in terms of battery health. And no, we do not need to replace the battery because we're above that particular metric threshold. So I'm going to hit done. Now we can see kind of the flow so far, right? So if we need to replace the battery, maybe what we'll do is we'll engage with the employee, and we want to let him or he or she know, hey, we see your battery's approaching the end of its life. Let's go ahead and get you a new one, right? So just to kind of let them know that we're going to kick off that process behind the scenes, right? So we'll call this notify employee of battery replacement. And we'll put in the campaign. I have one right here. And so this will be the campaign that we sent. This is basically a notification that'll pop up in the bottom right-hand corner. And this will notify them, again, only for the users that need a battery replacement. We'll let them know that we're going to be working on that for them. So what maybe would make sense after that is to create a service request. And so in other words, to go open up a request in ServiceNow, assign it to the right team, again, with the right context, so we know which device needs a battery replacement. And then after that, we could end that particular flow on this side over here. You can see the end state. And then on the no, well, if we don't need to replace the battery, maybe there's nothing we need to do. And then just in that particular flow just ends. So you can see just in a few moments how quickly I'm able to build out kind of a flow and be off to the races in terms of having another self-healing type of event happen behind the scenes, and when necessary, involve the user so we can keep them in the loop and kind of notify them that we're going to be working for them. And this is a type of kind of transformative white glove approach that you can go through with something like Flow. How different of an experience it is when my battery just starts to act up and I'm frustrated and I can't do my job. And now all of a sudden I have IT reaching out to me saying, I know, Catherine, your batteries need to be replaced. We can see this. We're going to help you now. That's the kind of white glove treatment that orchestration and automation can ultimately provide to your employee experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Luis, for that demo. I think what really highlighted that for me is that we just have Flow's drag and drop functionality and low code visual designer means that the automation is not just limited to the EUC engineers with that PowerShell expertise we're talking about, but now it can really be opened up to other team members as well. So once you have addressed a recurring issue and trained your team to create and leverage the workflows, you can really begin to democratize orchestration and automation and use the greater efficiency to achieve greater effectiveness and outcomes. And something else I think that's really important to highlight here with the ease of use is that we also have the ability to focus on use cases. So now that we have looked at device health and really start to address those reoccurring issues, the time that IT is spending every day firefighting, being reactive, we can then move into really focusing on democratizing Flow, having the teams be able to use it much broader, not just a few experts, but really having the role-based access control to be able to expand it out across the team. And then from there, it's about employee productivity, IT productivity, and not just being more efficient, not just finally solving those pain points, but really being able to deliver those outcomes and to drive ultimately IT and employee productivity with these broader use cases. So in this next demonstration, Luis, I think what would be great to see is now that we've seen more of the device health use cases with the SCCM client health, as well as the battery, Let's move in now to something that's a little bit more on the proactive IT side, and really showcase a use case that will help to deliver significant value to the business. Is there one you had in mind for that?
Yeah, I thought we'd go through a workflow highlighting how we can help with a more challenging use case like license reclamation, right? This is one of those scenarios I know from my past life working on the customer side of the fence and going through this myself. There's not always an easy way to figure out who or who doesn't need a license, right? Whether we're talking about some sort of desktop or SaaS application, right? Employees will change roles, they'll change departments, and you're not always notified against who should be provisioned or deprovisioned in terms of that license, right? And more often than not, organizations have very manual posture or processes around the license provisioning and deprovisioning processes, right? And this can lead to kind of human error. And then more importantly, over time for your business, this can really be a costly type of issue, right? So we want to help you, one, with gaining visibility into who is or who is not using an application. And in other words, we want to help you be in a place where what if you could engage with your employees that are using the application the least. Let's say you notice employees haven't used an application in 60 or 90 days, and you want to engage with them to understand, Catherine, do you still need this particular application? Are you still using it? And you can see here, maybe we'll go in and ask them, hey, maybe I've changed roles and I'm in a different department, and you know what? I don't need this application any longer. Well, in that particular example, you can see here flow. We're going to check in, are they in the right group? So they have access to this particular application. We've asked the user if they need to continue to use this application. And you can see as I scroll down here, we're asking the user for permission. This goes back to that campaign example we walked through earlier. Does the user still need the software? Yes, I do. I'm in the role, we need it. Okay, we'll end the flow, no action required. But maybe they say, yeah, you know what? I have changed roles. I don't need it any longer. And that would kick off the process to then automatically reclaim that license, right? And this is going through behind the scenes and actually going through the actual API calls in this example to go to Azure to get the user name for that particular user that no longer needs that application access, and then also to go into Azure to remove the group memberships so they no longer have access to that application, but also you reclaim that license. So this will lead to savings over time. And this is a use case that we help customers a lot with because we want to give you the visibility to know who isn't using an application, the means to be able to reclaim that in an automatic fashion. But also, when you go into the discussions with your vendors during kind of the renewal or true up types of conversations, we want to give you data-driven decisions, or we want to give you the confidence to make those data-driven decisions. So you know how many licenses your organization truly needs, right? Because software can be costly, right? And just kind of guessing doesn't cut it anymore, right? We need to make decisions based on data, right? And we also need mechanisms in place behind the scenes that can help us automatically tackle these types of challenging use cases. In addition to this, maybe this is a workflow that I'm developing in a non-production environment, for example. Maybe I'm just kind of in the early days of going through this license reclamation flow. What I could also do is, yes, I could build out all these steps again into my production environment, but I could also just go right to this NEAL tab, as we call it. And this is our NextThink experience automation language. And so this is really kind of the underlying code that's kind of behind the scenes for this visual editor, right? In other words, what we can do is copy this JSON here and paste it over into our, let's say, our production environment. And then all of a sudden, when we paste that, we'll have our designer populated with the flow that we built in our non-production environment. So much easier way to kind of go from environment to environment, or if you work with other peers of yours that use NextThink, again, an easy way to bring kind of flows from organization to organization or from environment to environment.
Luis, thanks so much for that demo. I think what's great about showing that Neil tab too is I think even though we have the drag and drop functionality of the visual designer, people always like to be able to see the code, and whether they want to make edits or share it or save it down. So it's a great feature to be able to highlight on top of the license reclamation workflow itself. And I think what's so important about that license reclamation workflow is not only did you say we want to give people the data so they can have that cost savings and really make the right decisions, but it's not just the data based on, say, application usage, but really hearing from employees and making sure that the employee experience is front and center. I know personally, I've had applications in past roles removed because of the cyclical nature of using them. So maybe I hadn't used them within that last month or 3 months, but I need to something every quarter. So being able to ask the employees and get that direct feedback in an automated way means you don't have to sacrifice that component as well. So thanks for walking us through that example. So license reclamation today is certainly one of the documented use cases we have seen with Flow. And here, as we look at this example of other use cases, kind of to show the art of the possible and what people can achieve. And frankly, I'm very impressed with our customers to date and how they've been able to start from scratch and really find their own use cases that are very specific to the pain points they're seeing and be able to solve those so automatically. An example of that would be with Keysight Technologies. They had an issue around driver updates, and using a workflow, they were able to 100% automate the process without having to have any engineering time put into those workflows. And they were able to increase their driver reliability up to 99.8%. So that's a great example of being able to focus on device health, automate a workflow, and really get time back for your engineering team. Additionally, as we think about the use cases not tied to device health, but more tied to first call resolution and digital transformation, this is where we think about being maybe less reactive and really starting to be proactive and being able to fix issues at scale. We had one customer who had an issue with Adobe, that Adobe Photoshop, anytime somebody left a comment on the file, that would result in an error based on a recent update they had pushed. So it's tricky because they had 7,000 employees in their organization using Photoshop, but not all of them were aware of this bug because maybe they hadn't had the opportunity to save a comment yet. But once they did comment, it would crash, lose their work, and it was creating a lot of issues. So this organization knew that they couldn't rely on Adobe to send that fix quickly enough. So instead, what they did is they set up a workflow to roll back to the latest version until Adobe sent that fix. And what they really liked about this workflow is it allowed them to be very tailored, very targeted, so they could only reach out to those 7,000 customers. And as a result, it was 100% resolved. Everyone was successfully rolled back. It stopped any tickets tied to Adobe Photoshop. And they calculated that just with this singular workflow for the singular use case, they saved 3,500 hours, or as they like to call them, repurposed hours, because those are hours they were able to apply to other use cases and other projects. So certainly device health, first call resolution, digital transformation are all areas where you can see automating would go a long way. And then really what we start to think about too are these use cases where we're driving that employee productivity. So self-healing, self-tuning. I see VPN mentioned here, and I feel like we can't be on a call lately without somebody mentioning a pain point tied to VPN today. And this certainly was true for one of our customers, Qualcomm Incorporated. They had a VPN sync issue where 90% of their workforce was disrupted. They were unable to connect to their core applications, unable to reset their passwords, and this was a significant impact to their organization and to employee productivity. So as a result, they were able to set up a workflow and push that out, and they saw a 98% success rate, and that really helped to significantly reduce the tickets, the disruptions, and they were very pleased with the IT outcomes and the employee productivity tied to that. So these are just a few of the use cases that you can achieve with Flow. And what we really want to focus on here is that they help to drive the EUC operational excellence. So being able to not only transform employees' experiences, but also the efficiency around IT. So as we look here at our next slide, I think this is best illustrated with this focus on continuous engineering to improve IT and employee productivity. So we know that, to summarize here, to start, we really want to help IT and EUC teams resolve the recurring issues like driver updates, device restart enforcement. And these are the issues that are taking up a lot of time, generating a lot of tickets, impacting your MTTR. And they're just the issues that you can't get past. But until you solve these recurring issues, you aren't able to focus enough significant time on the bigger projects, the more strategic work. So first, resolve those recurring issues. And then from there, once you've kind of solved that IT pain, you can focus on scaling and automating those cost savings. So as Luis showed with license reclamation, hardware refresh is another example. With a solution like Flow, you're able to tie into other third-party systems and automate across those to really expand your use cases and save costs with those APIs. So this is a great opportunity to tap into the larger IT ecosystem and use those automation tools to achieve that cost savings. And then lastly, as we look at achieving that kind of that holistic digital employee experience. So moving away from the IT pain and really addressing employees' pain and employee productivity. And that's where we get back to our initial vision that we talked about at the top of the presentation, zero touch IT. So examples where an employee is using their computer, they don't have access to a certain program or file. The system can automatically detect that, send them an engaged campaign where they can ask if they want access, have the manager approve that automatically, and then be able to deliver that permissions. So that's the future we see, where these automation workflows are saving significant time for engineering teams and delivering a lot of time back to employees by having this productivity. And ultimately, that is the key here, is giving both IT and employees that time back through this automated solution. So Doug, I think now that is the end of this slide portion. We'd love to hear from the audience. Any questions, of course, you have, Doug, or from the audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if anybody has any questions, shoot them on in, and I'll happily roll them through. I wanted to go back to one of your first points, which was around that State of the DEX industry report that you referenced, because I think this topic is so interesting, because it's kind of almost like an organic problem that came out of a revolution of technology. Because let's face it, employees rely on technology to get their job done almost universally across the board at this point. Certainly in some organizations it is universal. And in that State of the DEX industry report, which, by the way, I think you can download the whole thing if you go to the Next Think website. I'm sure there's a spot in there to get that download. But I did note that there was another statistic you referenced. I think it was 43% of time being spent by the EUC teams is being spent on just getting devices back to square one. But another stat, which I thought was interesting, is 85% of employees believe that their organization should be doing more to improve the digital employee experience, which is fascinating, because you've got kind of a yin and a yang here. You've got kind of like, I would say, and Luis, I'm going to ask you this question. What do you see when you're kind of at that beginning stage of kind of talking to a prospect? What do you see as driving them to really think about a solution like Next Think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of the organizations we work with initially, it's kind of an acknowledgement that they don't have the visibility that they want, and they're missing some of the a lot of it's like they have data across different systems, and it's siloed data, siloed teams, and they're looking for kind of observability kind of in one single pane of glass, if you will, right? In addition to that, not just having the data, but a platform that you can do something with that data, right? So in the examples we've been walking through, so that you can go through some sort of orchestration and automation to go through kind of the self-healing that we've talked to, because that's really what it starts, right? As you start to talk about the shift left approach, we want to help organizations go from the kind of firefighting, the whack-a-mole with the incidents, the 20 questions game you have to go through when your user calls in, and you got to ask them a bunch of questions to figure out what's going on with their particular symptom that they're calling for. So we want to help you transform from those types of reactive postures into a place where you have automation helping you avoid these reoccurring issues. And then you're only working kind of the firefighting when it's those more complex issues. So a lot of organizations we work through kind of, they come to us with that type of challenge. And once they see how NextThink is able to help them transform, we continue to have more conversations, and sooner before you know it, they become a NextThink customer because they see the lights on. And that's actually something we use a lot. Is one of my recent customers, we had this term was turning the lights on. In other words, we have employees, you may only see 50-60% of incidents reported to your service management solution, right? But with something like NextThink, we can see what's happening on the device in real time, right? And we can act on that, right? So that really helps with that shift left approach we're talking about.
Yeah, Catherine, I got to believe that happens all the time, right? Somebody has a kind of an immediate problem that they're trying to solve, and then after because we see this a lot, after they've implemented a solution like NextThink, they realize, oh, there's way more we can do here. And so now we can start to solve some of the other problems that maybe we didn't come to you with right away. With regard to how people start to think about integrating NextThink, there is a question that we got around integration with other tools. Can you describe some of the ways that Flow would integrate with other tools?
Sure, I can take that one.
You want to take that?
Yeah. So one of the examples we walked through in the demonstration was, we try to solve as much as we can automatically, but for those complex situations where something can't be fixed, we may want to open up a service management incident, right? And that's kind of an example of how we can integrate with your current service management solution. But in other ways, right? In the license reclamation flow, that idea was we had a group membership in Azure, or Entra ID, right? In terms of that's driving the license in that software application, right? So that's integrating with Azure to go and get the group membership. And then when we validate that this user no longer needs access to that application, again, it's going to Azure to remove the group membership. So that's another way we can hook into kind of your ecosystem. But really the limits for us is, what does your other solution allow us to do? So if they're going to have APIs, there's going to be web calls or webhooks, I'm sorry. And these are all various ways that we can hook into other parts of your IT organization, or in other words, the other solutions that you guys leverage.
Yeah, so obviously a question in these sometimes tight times in the economy is always going to be an ROI question, which I'm sure you deal with all the time. Ultimately, when you're giving more tools to the EUC team, there's going to be some costs associated with that. How are you seeing those folks work through those ROI questions and justify the bringing a new solution?
There's a few different ways that we've worked with customers to really focus on the ROI. First is to look at their top ticket creators. So if they're able to reduce tickets and not send as many tickets or issues to the service desk, that's a real opportunity to not just have cost avoidance, but to really show cost savings, especially for organizations that are paying for like an outside service desk. So that's been a big opportunity. Additionally, looking at the employee productivity side, so being able to showcase the value to the employees and to the management team to help them to see that's like that soft ROI, but the ability to really impact that. A third opportunity that a customer recently did was to look back at an incident they had that was very problematic, that had a lot of visibility, significant disruptions to the workforce. And they showed how had they had flow, that would not have happened, and the cost they would have saved by avoiding that entirely. So there's a few different ways that we work with customers, but ultimately, what it really comes down to is that consultative approach to see what is their pain today and really mapping it to that pain. But certainly we've easily shown, as referenced in this presentation, that one workflow is able to save a certain number of hours, eliminate a certain number of tickets, and then that from there, they're able to associate the cost with their organization with that.
Yeah, so can you walk, I don't know who wants to take this one. Can you walk me through, because I think this is always interesting for our audience, what that beginning engagement starts to look like? You know, what should they be thinking about as they kind of come to those first discovery meetings? And then what is the process that you use to bring somebody through to really create the proper solution for them?
Yeah, so I work with prospects and customers do this regularly, Doug, and what we normally do is, Catherine mentioned, let's get an understanding of what's happening today. So usually we'll start with getting your kind of incidents, maybe your top 10, or it could be working backwards from what is kind of your revenue generating applications or revenue impacted applications or services that need to always be available and running, right? So having an understanding what kind of is currently going on, and then going through exercise of, okay, how do you go about this process today? How do you go about solving this incident? So if we're talking about, maybe one of your critical applications, it just seems to always be crashing. What do you do today to troubleshoot that? How do you fix it? What are the steps required? How long does it take you today to go through that manually? And go through the process of, actually going step by step, and so that we can actually understand what all needs to happen and what it's costing the organization in terms of time and also different resources, different teams. So we'll document all that. In fact, we have a customer success management team that really helps align customers to getting the most value they can out of NextSync. And then what we'll do from there is go through the actual remediation piece of things, right? So build out the flow itself that's going to help solve this issue in an automatic fashion. And then, do kind of a cost analysis to say, all right, it took you, every time someone comes in with this particular issue, it takes you an hour for your IT folks, maybe a couple different teams to go through the resolution. But it also costs your employee so many hours of employee downtime, for example. And then when we go through automatically and resolve this in a self-healing fashion, for example, now you're able to go in a place where I think Catherine mentioned earlier, kind of that repurposing of hours, right? Or restructuring of where your team's spending. So in other words, instead of focusing on the firefighting, now they can focus on kind of the strategic parts of IT, the proactive initiatives that are usually more fun to do. And then it's kind of an exercise to say, now you're saving for every workflow that we do. And again, we can open up that incident and also automatically resolve it as well in your service management solution. Now you have ways to audit and track the results. So what we'll do is customers will go through this exercise, and maybe over a month, they can start to see, wow, with Flow, we're able to solve this issue behind the scenes. Without Flow, this would have cost us hundreds or thousands of hours. And then over time, you can really start to extrapolate a real business case. And that's where customers start to see, okay, this is just one particular challenge. How do we then go about this exercise across our other challenges? And that's really where they start to see the value in orchestration and automation, because it really helps them shift left. And over time, that is going to help them go from that reactive to a much more proactive posture. And these are the things that ultimately lead to that improved employee experience, that decreased employee productivity. Decreased employee downtime, not productivity. But these are the real outcomes that we're after that we get to.
Yeah, that's great. And I know. I mean, NextSync is a fully grown up solution. This is very well baked. You have over 1,000 customers, some of the biggest name brands on the planet. I'm curious, before So we would obviously encourage everybody to reach out and talk to somebody smart like Luis about all the problems that you may be experiencing. But we also understand that there are sometimes steps that need to be taken prior to that. So Catherine, I'll ask you, because you have a lot of information on the website. There's a resources tab that has a lot of blogs, ebooks, reports, on-demand webinars, all kinds of things. There's a big customer tab as well. I'm wondering if you would have any recommendations for somebody who wants to maybe do a little bit of self-discovery or self-research prior to reaching out, what they might focus on that you have available for them on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd encourage them to go to nextthink.com/flow. And that's a great jumping off point. That includes a 90-second demo, as well as customer quotes and testimonials, and the opportunity to set up a consult to see more as well.
Excellent. So we have always a lot of vernacular being used, and in this particular case, there's a couple of different terms that I'd love to try to get a little bit more clarity on for my own self. Can you describe the difference between task automation and orchestration?
Yes.
And I don't know who wants to take that one. Is that you, Catherine?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take it. I'm sure Luis can chime in as well. But as we think about task automation, it's when you're scheduling, say, remediation or remote action, a short automation to execute one thing. So like find out how much disk space is left, for example. And it's just one singular action that's automated to achieve a task or to gather information. And what orchestration does is it pulls task automations as well as employee engagement campaigns, integrations with APIs, and it pulls them all together to be orchestrated. So they are able to complete many tasks in a row automatically, and then they support that if-then value as well. And then they can continuously run to make sure that the problem is solved. So that big opportunity here is to think of task automation as a singular, solid automation, whereas orchestration is the opportunity to pull it all together and to automate it many things so they're able to achieve it across the board. Luis, is there anything that you would add to that?
That's well said. The only thing I'd add is maybe the task automation, going back to what we talked about earlier, that requires usually an expert in command line interface or PowerShell, like we've been talking about, right? And the orchestration is usually going to involve that kind of visual designer, right? And that's kind of that living documentation, that step-by-step process that Catherine mentioned, right? So no longer do you need to develop that logic all in one single task script. You'll be able to kind of break it apart and make it much easier in chunks, again, in that step-by-step fashion.
Yeah, and that's certainly something we've heard from our customers is that they like how the logic is separate from the remote actions or task automations, and it's much more flexible and modular, so you don't have to go into the code when you're changing the logic, and it's much more highly visible, easier to process as well, to kind of fully understand maybe outside of the engineering team, but for service desk or executive management to see what that workflow is going to do.
Yeah, so with regard to the last bit of that, so where are you seeing the pain kind of get to a point where, they reach out and connect with you guys? Is it at the kind of the code writing level, with the folks that are kind of really on the front line firefighting, or is it further up the management chain, kind of at the executive level, where they kind of know that this is more of a cultural issue? We need to make sure that the employee experience is as optimized as possible.
I hear more often than not the latter. So in other words, leadership, and this is kind of what we mentioned earlier, by the time leadership, or by the time you see an incident in your service management solution, it's almost too late, right? Your employee's already been impacted. Likely their productivity's also been impacted. There's that frustration. So by the time they escalate to leadership, it's in a much different place, right, that you don't want to get to. So I think a lot of that's coming from, we have employees that need to be productive that can't be productive, and technology is the bottleneck there. And so that posture, it's like when you look yourself in the mirror, like that's going to drive that change, right? And so as we start to talk with them, they start to acknowledge, okay, in order for me to get out of this firefighting posture, I need to get to a place where I can start to automate these reoccurring issues over here that my service desk and EUC teams are fighting through on a daily basis, right? I want to give them more time back to work on what that desired state should look and feel like. Instead of always having to manually fix it, let's have our automation run behind the scenes for us. And then while that's happening, we can work on really the proactive projects and make sure that those are optimized, again, so we can improve that employee productivity and that experience along with it.
Yeah, Catherine, anything to add there?
Yep, I would also add that what we've seen too is for a long time in EUC and service desk, there's been continually adding heads to kind of keep up with all the demands we see today, from cloud computing to security risks. And we know that in today's current climate, people can't continually grow and scale their teams to keep up with the challenges they're facing. So a lot of times when people run up against that and the shortcomings with the ability to fully staff a team, their teams are just so overburdened and they just don't have enough time. They're looking for a solution that can help give that time back. That's another catalyst we've seen as well.
Yeah, so you've had obviously some clients, like I said, some pretty amazing name brands that have been with you for a while. Can you talk through the journey that you see them take with regard to the solution and how they're dealing with optimizing their digital employee experience? I mean, what do you see as kind of a typical path for that maturity around this type of thinking?
So what I would say, and kind of Louise touched on this earlier, is that a lot of times customers don't realize how much information they don't have today or how they're working, and they're really blind, whether they can't see into other teams or technologies, things are too siloed. So as a first step, as we said, NextSync will turn the lights on, and our customers are able to see so much more across their tools, across their teams, and what every employee is experiencing. From there, it's really a matter of prioritizing against what they want to achieve, whether it's cost savings through license reclamation, a large-scale digital transformation project, ticket reduction. And then we work with them to be able to prioritize and act on that data, because the data is only as good as the information you're able to act on. So as the customers continue to mature and develop more use cases and utilize the features across the NextSync platform, we're then able to really help them to scale and continue to leverage additional data, whether it's about their applications or take on to the next step to using like a workflow automation tool like Flow. But really it starts with the understanding that they don't have all the data, prioritizing what data they want to see, acting on it, and helping them to move from reactive to proactive to continuous engineering.
Yeah, this is so again, I go back to this this digital employee experience report that you did. This was a survey of 1,000 senior IT decision makers and 1,000 office workers just over the summer. So incredibly fresh and incredibly deep, and I think statistically significant. And it's interesting to note, 7 out of 10 IT decision makers view a poor tech experience as a contributing factor to a negative employee experience. And they're talking about work quality, morale, customer relations, the IT department's reputation. So this is something that that is really an important issue that I'm not sure. I'm curious. Does everybody see it? That I mean, do they recognize that employee experience? Because it seems to me like one of those solutions that that's a little bit more subtle, in that some organizations culturally might not care, if you will. I mean, where do you find the kind of state of the modern organization as they think about this? Are they really dialing in here?
I can speak to that. So I think some customers will come in, and you're right. Maybe there's not so much focus on what we call like employee sentiment, or which is a big part of experience management. And there may be more focus on the hard data, right? The telemetry, the technology data. So that's usually where, like, Catherine kind of alluded to, we have a maturity framework, and we work with customers where they're at. And some customers may make sense to work on some of that low hanging fruit. So in other words, some of those device performance issues, that kind of desired state, if you will. And then other organizations, as they go through that, they may also want to include their employee sentiment. So that's the idea of having kind of your hard data, the technical data, and then also the employee sentiment, which would be kind of that soft data. But that's really what gives you a much more comprehensive or holistic view into what's happening. So one of the examples I talk with customers all the time is, we're always making changes in IT. That's inevitable. But what if you could, instead of going to your phase 1 or phase 2, what if you had not just the telemetry around how the device and the internet, the applications, all the parts that make it service, understand how that works technically? That's great. But a lot of times people just wait to see if issues happen. And then if no issues happen in a week or two, let's move on and roll out to more users in phase 2. But what if you had also a way to get their employee sentiment? So in other words, hey, Doug, how's your experience been since we pushed this we migrated your machine from Windows 10 to Windows 11? How have you been doing? Have we impacted your experience? And maybe you say, everything's been amazing. And maybe Catherine says the same. Well, that's a much more data-driven confidence to go into my change management meeting to say, I think we're ready for phase 2. However, if you guys both raise your hand and say, I'm having a lot of problems, this is slow, and I'm having all types of issues. Now I know I need to take a step back, work with the users that are impacted, get the fix, make sure all those wrinkles are ironed out. And now going into phase 2, I've been able to kind of tackle the technical issues. I'm now confident that we've solved those issues. So again, we're preventing issues impacting the larger base as you go into the later deployment rings.
Yeah, this is a topic we could go on and on about. I find it fascinating, but we're going to have to wrap it up. So thanks very much for the time today. This was great. I always love talking about this stuff. And NextThink, for anybody in our audience, certainly, NextThink is something you should have on your radar, and you should be at least on the website, nextthink.com, and checking out everything that Catherine suggested you take a look at. But I would encourage you to reach out and talk to someone like Luis about how they can help. But anyway, thanks, guys, for the time today. This has been great. Appreciate it. Best of luck in the coming year.
Thank you, Doug. It's been great.
Have a good day, everybody.
So there you have it. Another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank NextThink and Catherine and Louise for that fine presentation. And we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.